This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here's the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And good evening. We have returned for another episode of A Different Perspective, and I really, truly am Kevin Randle. I am joined today by Robert Sheaffer, whom I've known for ever and a week, and I believe he and I actually went sailing on the Potomac once with Philip Klass, who did not remember this event, and Robert may in fact remember it. But Robert is a
yeah, but I remember it.
Okay, then I have confirmation. Robert is a writer with a lifelong interest in astronomy and the question of life on other planets. He is one of the leading skeptical investigators of UFOs, a fellow of the well-known Committee for Skeptical Inquirer, CSI, which used to be PSYCOP, and has written the psychic vibration column for its publication, the Skeptical Inquirer, for over 35 years. He is a founding director and a past chairman of the Bay Area Skeptics, a skeptics group in, guess what, San Francisco, Bay Area. And he has published books on a variety of paranormal topics and has appeared on many radio and television programs. His latest book is Bad UFOs, and you can learn more about Robert at his website, www.debunker.com, which gives you a clue to his attitudes, and his blog, www.badufos.com. Robert, welcome to A Different Perspective.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm very happy to be here.
Even though we are going to clash somewhat, I fear.
Oh, that's even better.
That's what makes for better radio anyhow.
Right. Although, I don't know, there's some things that we may not clash on as much as we might have at one time, but that's further discussion.
Well, I think as I have aged, matured, I have changed my attitudes based on evidence I've seen or the lack of evidence for certain things. And I would hope that you feel the same way or operate in the same fashion, change your attitudes and whatnot as you see evidence or the lack of that evidence. But you, if I read your book correctly, Bad UFOs, get that in once again, you come at this from the point of view that there is no alien visitation.
Well, yes, that's my thinking, and it's been my thinking, I think, for as long as I've been interested and been following this stuff. And that's been, as in your case, it has been just about 50 years, because during the late 60s, I was a student at Northwestern University, and of course our department chairman in astronomy was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and I spoke with him a lot, got to know him. I took his classes, and he was a very sincere guy, but we disagreed. He was inclined to believe in what he would call reliable witnesses, that if just anybody told of seeing a fleet of UFOs or something land or whatever, you wouldn't take it too seriously. But if they were reliable witnesses and they were pillars of the community and they were sober individuals and they had college degrees or important positions, then you can't deny the testimony of people like that. And so these things must really exist as described. And that's basically was Hynek's his position on this. And I, on the other hand, would argue, well, not just that, from what we know of psychology, and now we know a whole lot more about this, how easy it is to fool people and how easy it is for people to remember things wrongly. So my argument being that, you would expect to have a few oddball, errors and things like this. Just, if enough people going outside and hearing stories about UFOs and news reports and whatever, and it kind of colors how we see a rather ambiguous stimulus that's up in the sky. We perceive things in ways that our brains have prepared us to perceive them.
Which is an interesting for you to say, because when I did my PhD dissertation, it was belief structure affecting the identification of ambiguous stimuli, which are lights in the sky. And that if
then you know all about it.
Then if you came at it from the point of view that there's alien visitation and you saw a strange light in the sky, you interpreted it as a UFO, meaning an alien spacecraft, not unidentified flying object. And if you had a deep religious background, you might identify it as a manifestation of angels or ghosts or something of that nature. So
yes, and number of sightings, a number of religious visions and things, especially when you look back in history, far dwarfs any number of people who are seeing aliens. I think even today there are more people who claim to have encounters with angels and such.
Robert, I need
with aliens.
I need to interrupt you because we're coming up against a break here already. We will be back with a different perspective, and for more information, look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
How would you like to be able to read other people's minds? Well, the next best thing is here. When you know how to read a person's name, you know how the person thinks, feels, and behaves. Each letter in our name holds a key to unlock our true essence. Our name contains both our gifts and challenges in this lifetime. Mnemology science discovers personality secrets hidden in the placement of the letters of our names, including the first and last impression people remember about us. Sharon shows us how to interpret the arrangement of letters as outlined in her book, Know the Name, Know the Person. Sharon Lynn Wyeth created mnemology science after 18 years of research and testing her theories, and has supported thousands of people around the world in understanding themselves and others better. You'll enjoy Sharon's unique teachings as she shares her system to learn the gifts behind your given birth name. Even if you don't like your birth name, there are jewels in this book. If you're thinking of changing your name, ready to name your child, or wanting to get along better with others, this is the book for you. If you'd like to improve your relationships and change your life for the better, get the book today, Know the Name, Know the Person, or visit www.knowthename.com. That's www.knowthename.com.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Afterlife expert Roberta Grimes was the first one to say that dying can be fun. Now her best-selling book, The Fun of Dying, is available in stores worldwide. So if you wonder whether death ends life, how it feels to die, or what heaven might be like, The Fun of Dying was written for you. And if you have always been afraid of death, or if you worry that your life has no meaning, let The Fun of Dying ease your fears and bring new meaning to your life. Nothing said in The Fun of Dying is based on the teachings of any religion. Instead, Roberta draws on evidence to explain how death happens, how it feels, and what comes next. A lot of the best death-related evidence was produced in the first half of the 20th century. When it is put together with recent discoveries, it tells a consistent and amazing story. Roberta Grimes blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Her wonderful book, The Fun of Dying.
And we are back. I have somehow spaced out. I don't know what I was thinking there. My guest is Robert Sheaffer, who is an arch skeptic who doesn't believe in alien visitation and thinks all the UFO sightings that are reported have a terrestrial explanation. And for a great majority of them, I think he's probably right. We were talking a little bit about belief structure and its impact on identification of ambiguous stimuli. And I think we really kind of covered that. I know I had to interrupt Robert because we were up against a break there. But I think he and I both agree that in many cases, the witness will identify these stimuli is something that they're familiar with or comfortable with or something like that, which may inhibit their actual identification. But what I wanted to get into some of this skeptical stuff with Robert. And the question, well, the question I have, and I've never got a satisfactory answer for it, and Robert probably can give us one, is we who are investigate UFOs, if we believe in alien visitation, they say we have a bias built into our investigation that leads us in that direction. And I'm wondering, Robert, don't you have a similar bias built into your investigations because you think there's a terrestrial explanation? So that bias.
You could call it a bias, but I don't think of it that way. I think in terms of Occam's razor, we know. Well, let's say we don't, people claim that aliens are visiting us, but there's no hard science or anything to support that. So if, as far as beings, that are not known to exist, if you can hypothesize an unknown beings as an explanation for something you want to explain, well, Occam says that you should choose the one that has the explanation that has the fewest speculative elements or the fewest new entities or whatever. If we have to create a new category of entities, such as visiting extraterrestrials who are very shy and play peekaboo and in general hide from us most of the time, there's no hard evidence that such things exist, and there's a lot of reasons to think that it doesn't exist. So I think just Occam's razor alone, it compels one to be skeptical and to adopt the null hypothesis, which is no, these are just things that we've seen before, meteors and whatever else, and now we have human hoaxes and drone flights and all kinds of things that people are seeing, Chinese lanterns, and that they're perceiving them according to previously existing concepts in their mind.
What about when we have
That's,
multiple? What if we? But what about when we have multiple chains of evidence? Meaning we've got eyewitnesses on the ground, and I understand the problem with eyewitness testimony, maybe better than most people. And we have, say, radar tracks and landing traces and maybe photographs. We have multiple chains of evidence. So clearly, we're not dealing with somebody's.
Well, but let's ask the question of whether these are all really consistent, or is it, when they say there's a radar visual case, what'll usually happen is some target, unexpected target, turns up in radar, and somebody will say, "Go outside and see if you can see anything." And the guy goes up and sees Venus. "Oh yeah, I see something." That goes down as a radar visual case. If you could show very clearly that all these things are consistent in terms of time, in terms of direction, and so on, then I think you would have something solid. But I don't think there's any cases that really quite come up to that level.
What about the Washington Nationals when you had aircraft scrambled off Newcastle Air Force Base to intercept objects that were seen on the radar screens, and when the jets got into position, the anomalous propagation, the targets seemed to disappear. Or in one case where the objects actually approached the fighter plane, and the pilot saw it coming at him, and was, you might say, engaged by the UFOs.
Well, I mean, if the first part of what you said, I think, tells us a lot about what we need to know here, and that is that there was anomalous propagation and a good deal of confusion. And when you get a situation like this of, jets flying around and targets appearing and disappearing, I mean, I don't recall the exact specifics of this case that you're referring to, but again, is it the case that everything ties in, consistently, and even if it appears to be the case in just this one instance, the question I would ask is why don't we have, if there were other pilots up there and other targets, why just this one instance where it seemed to be real and everything else they seem to be chasing, mirages or anomalous propagations?
I would say that other pilots did see them. And in fact, some cases the pilot said, "You have a target on the radar at this location." So the pilot of the aircraft, and these were airline pilots who are the credible observers that Alan Hynek would talk about.
I remember what he said, but
what I'm saying is, these guys are familiar with what's in the sky, and sure, they can be fooled. The Charles Whitted case proves that. But we have airline pilots who spotted the things and called the air traffic controllers, and the air traffic controller says, "Yes, there's something there." And we had, in one instance, the target seen on 3 separate radars. So you've got some very good radar visual sightings going on there. And it's not that somebody said, "Well, go outside and take a look." It's a pilot saying, "Do you have traffic in my vicinity?" Which is a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah. Well, not having that information right in front of me, I can't give you a detailed discussion of it. But, if you want to point for further discussion down the line, either on blogs or in another show, is something that you think is the best accounting of that and the most credible accounting of it, I'll take a look at it and spend a little time and see what I can give you my take on it then. But if this, there's been a lot written about these cases, or it's not really one case, it's a whole slew of cases of around 1952 in the summer, and class has written about it. A lot of people have written about it. So if we want to try to pin this down, we're going to have to get a little more specific here.
Well, I'm just suggesting that there's an area involved in this case that kind of meets some of the criterion, which is not to say what we're dealing with is alien spacecraft, merely that there were things in the sky that were not easily identified, and it worried the president greatly, which would have been Harry Truman at the time.
Yes.
And this resulted in what I think of as the greatest headline I've ever seen in a newspaper. Banner headline across the Cedar Rapids Gazette, which is right out of a science fiction movie. It says, "Saucers swarm over Capitol." And I'm thinking, didn't I see that in Earth versus the Flying Saucers or something? Anyway, well, that was just one example. And I really don't have anything sitting in front of me telling me about that. I'm just kind of dealing with what I remember about the case as well. But I talked to Dewey Fournay, who was the Pentagon liaison for UFOs, and Al Chop, who was the official civilian spokesman on UFOs for the Pentagon, who were in the radar rooms one of the nights this happened. And so they were giving me kind of an interesting perspective of what happened that night. And I'm not sure that the anomalous propagation argument works for everything in that case. Although there was to be fair, there was one case where they radar operators were trying to direct a guy to an object, a B-25 pilot and his crew to an object, and every time they said you're right over the object, he was over the Potomac River, and there was some kind of a boat on there, and the anomalous propagation bends the radar waves, so it may have been that the radar scope was picking up this object on the Potomac. So there are
sometimes ground objects turn up. Now the electronics has gotten much better in the radar in terms of rejecting false images, and it has been pointed out by Phil Klass and others that these types of radar sightings, big-scale radar sightings especially, aren't really happening anymore. And it's either because the UFOs went away, as some people would say, or it's because we're getting better at identifying and rejecting false targets and false propagation. So, it's hard to say. Can I ask you something about Roswell? Can we get on that for a moment?
I was actually gonna wait until the next segment before we got to Roswell.
All right, fine. We'll do the Roswell next.
Go ahead and ask your question, because it may lead into the question I had for you. So let's see what we can do.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm looking at this review by Jerome Clark of your newest book of the Roswell in the 21st Century, and this is in 40 Times, I believe, the current issue. He says that this book is noteworthy for being the first recantation by a major figure in the controversy, now nearing its fourth decade. So the first question I'd want to ask you is, do you agree with his characterization? He calls it recanting Roswell certainty. Do you feel that there is an element of recanting in this book?
Well, when you say element, certainly there is. And what I did was look at it as a cold case. Starting over from scratch, looking at all the files, looking at the interviews, how things have gone, what we've learned about some of the witnesses, and how unreliable they were. And looking at that sort of thing and bringing those things forward, trying to put everything into one place where a reader who is familiar with Roswell or not familiar with Roswell can get the latest information, but get both sides of the argument for a lot of these things. And I look at, for example, I call Walter Haut the real father of Roswell, simply because of the way his story evolved and how he was able to guide us to specific witnesses. I'm thinking here of Glenn Dennis. I had heard that there had been a mortician involved, and I remember sitting in his living room asking him questions. He said, "I know the name you're fishing for. It's Glenn Dennis." And Glenn Dennis had this marvelous story of the nurse and the preliminary autopsies being conducted at the Roswell Army Airfield and that sort of thing. And it turns out that Glenn Dennis was not telling us the truth, and there were a lot of problems with that. And I try to bring all of that sort of thing out in the book. So we look at that, and then we look at Walter Haut, who had said repeatedly, "I only wrote the press release. I only wrote the press release." And in fact, there's one interview that he conducted. He said, "I asked Colonel Blanchard if I could see the craft, and Blanchard said no." And so we have that on the record. And then we moved to 2000 and later, and he's talking about how he had seen the craft. He had seen the bodies, but he would contradict himself in a single sentence. "Well, I didn't see anything, but I saw one of the bodies," or something like that. It wasn't quite that way, but it was in that direction. And I'm not sure how reliable that could be.
Have to really congratulate you for pursuing this and for not just letting these inconsistencies slide by like so many writers will do. I wrote, I think this is in my book, and also in some talks I gave. I talked about Carl Flock and how he started out as a believer in the Roswell crash story, and his wife, I guess, was working for Congressman what was his name, Sheaffer, and so on, and they had requested this information from the government concerning Roswell. Anyway, he ended up very skeptical. He wrote a book, 2001, Roswell, Inconvenient Facts and the Will to Believe, and in it he said he demonstrated inconsistencies like you're talking about, that just of the just 4 people who are publicly identified as witnesses to alien bodies.
I'm going to have to interrupt you. Hold on to that quote. Okay. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. I promise you this time we'll come back to it because I want to talk about this as well.
Right. Excellent.
And some of this we're talking about Carl Flock and his investigation. You can find some information about that at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And don't forget that Robert is at www.debunker.com, and his blog is www.badufos.com. And we will be right back after this.
While science pursues fact, magic accesses the quantum level, bridging random facts to form truth. As long as science and magic remain separate and polarized, the truth cannot be known. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Join me on the Science of Magic radio program, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. During each episode, I'll be speaking with experienced and respected scientists and mystics. From astrologers to astronomers, from medical doctors to shaman, the scientific method to dowsing and intuition, we'll weave together information from seemingly divergent practices to promote unity and enlightenment. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic right here on the Mutual Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at.
Wouldn't you love to know the secret to everything? Well then, meet Dr. Kimberly McGeorge and her cutting-edge breakthrough knowledge that combines science with possibility. Dr. Kimberly brings real-life answers and healing to those open to alternative solutions. She teaches solution-based programs and classes that will change all areas of your life forever. Specializing in conscious creation, intuitive readings, and energy medicine, you can rapidly shift health, relationships, business, and money and abundance challenges quickly. Receive her best-selling book, Secret to Everything, at no cost by going to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone. That's right, transformation can start now. Just go to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone and receive Dr. Kimberly's book for free.
Afterlife expert Roberta Grimes was the first one to say that dying can be fun. Now her best-selling book, The Fun of Dying, is available in stores worldwide. So if you wonder whether death ends life, how it feels to die, or what heaven might be like, The Fun of Dying was written for you. And if you have always been afraid of death, or if you worry that your life has no meaning, let The Fun of Dying ease your fears and bring new meaning to your life. Nothing said in The Fun of Dying is based on the teachings of any religion. Instead, Roberta draws on evidence to explain how death happens, how it feels, and what comes next. A lot of the best death-related evidence was produced in the first half of the 20th century. When it is put together with recent discoveries, it tells a consistent and amazing story. Roberta Grimes blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Her wonderful book, The Fun of Dying.
And we are back with Robert Sheaffer, whom I cut off because we were coming up against a break here, and he was talking about Carl Flock in his book, Roswell, Inconvenient Facts and the Will to Believe. And you were going to quote
how time flies when you're having fun.
Oh, absolutely. And you were going to read a short segment from that, although I much prefer that you promote my book, Roswell in the 21st Century.
Well, I'm about to get to your book after I talk about his book.
Okay.
What Flock said in 2001 was after analyzing the story of the 4 publicly identified witnesses, he said, quote, "Not one of the purported first-hand witnesses to alien bodies and a lone survivor is credible. Not one." End quote. Now, looking at this review in 40 Times of your new book, which I haven't seen your new book yet, so I have to rely on what it says here.
And it's supposed to be coming to you from the publisher, and I sent him a copy of the review and your address 2 weeks ago.
Okay, well, fantastic. I'm sure it'll get here at some point. The reviewer, Jerome Clark, said, of 8 claimants he spoke, that is you spoke directly with all who said they had observed such bodies. Randle writes, not one, ... turned out to be telling the truth. So essentially, you're saying what Flock said back then, only you've raised the number from 4 to 8. And
I had always said that I had talked to 8 people who claimed to have seen the bodies, and I said that as early as 1991, 1992. And some of them I thought were quite reliable, and they all, well, Glenn Dennis was one of them, for example, and they all seem to have blown up on us. So Flock was correct on that point, that the people who claimed firsthand knowledge of the bodies, we were left with basically secondhand testimony, family members who said that my father saw the bodies, or my brother saw the bodies, or something like that. So he's right.
And of course, the whole reason for this is, to try to explain these sightings of bodies, we get these oddball things like Andy Jacobson writes that it was a commie Nazi saucer with Mengele and Stalin, and they had crashed in Roswell with children who'd been mutilated or something, and this crazy stuff like that, or that they supposedly, the Air Force was dropping crash test dummies or something in the desert, and this is intended as an explanation of why we have reports, why people are seeing bodies in the desert. But I think what we've just established is nobody really is testifying to seeing these little bodies, or at least nobody who appears to be telling the truth is seeing bodies.
Well, we have some interesting secondhand testimony, and I quote it that way, secondhand testimony that suggests that. And we have some problems. We go back to Carl Flock, and he writes that he had spoken to 3 firefighters, Dan Dwyer being a fire lieutenant, the father of Frankie Rowe, who told her that he had seen the bodies. And Flock says he talked to the firefighters, and not one of them said this was true. They didn't make the run outside the city limits. What I point out in my book is that I talked to one of those guys as well. And we were talking about this, and he was telling me the exact same thing he told Carl Flock. We didn't make a run. We didn't go out there. And I asked another question. I said, do you know Dan Dwyer? And he said, oh, I know Dan. He went out there. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, he went out in his private car. This colonel came by, and I don't know why it's always a colonel. It's never a captain, never a major. It's always a colonel. Came by and said, we have this handled. You guys don't need to go out there. So Dwyer went out in his private car. So there was no fire department run out there, so we couldn't find it in the fire records, which we couldn't find because I'd looked. But we had a firefighter who Carl had talked to, who told him that we didn't make the run out there, which was true, but he didn't ask the follow-up question. And that kind of bugged me a little bit about Carl's book. He didn't go the extra step to ask the additional question, which leads me into my next point about skepticism. A lot of the skeptics embraced the Project Mogul explanation for Roswell. My question to you is this: what about the entry in Albert Crary's diary? It says flight number 4, the culprit, supposedly that caused this idea of an alien spacecraft, flight number 4 was canceled and it never flew. How come the skeptical community, and I would think as a skeptic, anything that you look at, you have to look at it with a skeptical eye, whether it kind of fits into your bias or works against your bias, which is what I attempt to do in Roswell in the 21st century, work against my bias in this. But aren't you obligated as a skeptic to look at even the explanations as skeptically?
Oh, absolutely, and you do have to keep that in mind. And now I forget which flight was. It was supposed to be this one specific flight that
Yes.
they saw. I mean, yeah. Now, again, are we certain that he says, well, it didn't fly, but are there other records? Are there?
Yes.
My understanding, there were several flights that went sort of missing, and they landed somewhere, but they didn't find out exactly where.
Nope, not true. All the flights are accounted for except for flight number 4. Flight number 4 in Albert Crevy's diary, and he's the guy leading the project in Alamogordo at the time, wrote of flight number 4, the flight was canceled. He then writes that we flew a cluster of balloons later in the day. Cluster of balloons was not flight number 4. We know what a cluster of balloons was based on other documentation that we have on that. There is no notice in the records of flight number 4. It says the first successful flight in New Mexico was flight number 5. Charles Moore, who was the one that kind of got us rolling in this Project Mogul thing, who was on the project back in 1947, said that that flight number 4 actually performed as well as flight number 5, which leads us to the question, if that was true, why is there no record of flight number 4, and why does Albert Crevy's diary say it was canceled? So we have the documentation that tells us one thing, we have a witness telling us something else, and I'm not pointing a finger at you specifically, Robert, but we have the skeptical community embracing that explanation when the documentation says it simply doesn't work.
Well, I guess what you're saying is that the documentation is inconsistent here because, Moore says one thing and the other guy says another thing. And
No. Moore has no documentation to back it up. Moore is going strictly on his memory of the flights. He's saying this is what happened. I'm saying the documentation tells us one thing. There is no contrary documentation to refute it. It is merely Moore's explanation.
Explanation, yeah. Well, again, I haven't followed all the details of that yet, but if it does turn out that this is ironclad in terms of it not being mogul. I mean, there could certainly be a lot of other things, just plain old weather balloons from somewhere else, from a long ways away, coming down. I don't think we have enough really good information as to what was found. We do have that photo, General Ramey and the debris, and so I guess that's basically is our best. If you believe that that's what they actually recovered, or if you believe that they switched it somehow as part of the, as part of the cover-up.
It's absolutely true that the photographs taken in General Ramey's office are of a weather balloon and a radar reflector. That's absolutely clear. And Project Mogul was made up of radar reflectors and weather balloons and microphones and some other things like that. The arrays were at one point about 600 feet long, and they were required to file NOTAMs, which are notices to airmen, for those of you who are not pilots. Telling them about the hazards to navigation. And a NOTAM could be something, a runway at an airport is closed for reconstructions, or there's trees at the end of the runway that could present a hazard. But it's things that you need to know about the airport. And since these arrays were 600 feet long, they thought they might pose a threat to aerial navigation. And so they were required to file NOTAMs of the first some flights about that out of New Mexico. But the thing was, they were not allowed to fly them in cloudy weather, and they were not allowed to launch them prior to dawn, so that the pilots would have an opportunity to see them. And flight number 4, according to Moore, was launched at 2:30 in the morning, even though Crary says that we had no flight today because of clouds. So, I mean, I think the documentation is pretty clear on that point. And when you get your copy of Roswell in the 21st Century, there is a huge appendix that deals with all that information in great detail. So all the arguments are there, and what Moore has said, and what other people have said, and what the arguments turn out to be. And I'm not sure how excited the radio audience is about our discussion of this in such detail. But the question was simply that when we have documentation, which I think the skeptics would say take precedent over memories that are 40, 50 years old.
Yes,
why do the skeptics reject the documentation for Project Mogul? And I don't think for very good reasons. And I've noticed that in other cases where the skeptical argument really doesn't match all the facts, and yet the skeptical community seems to embrace it. And that was my question. Why shouldn't you remain skeptical of all aspects of it? And it seems that they...
Well, of course, and I remain open to explanations that it may have not been Mogul, may have been some other explanation. I would push back against extraterrestrial explanations on the grounds of Occam's razor and such. But if somebody wants to suggest that something else of human construction was out there and was found and was not identified, then it's I don't have a problem with that. But getting back to what we said earlier about the debris photographed in General Ramey's office, I mean, what you would presumably be saying is if this was not Mogul, if this was something else, then they must have come up with the debris from somewhere and then switched it, because what we're seeing is clearly radar reflectors and things like that. And so
but that's not a problem. That's not a problem for an active Air Force base, which has a weather station on it. And I actually asked Irving Newton, who was the weather officer that identified the balloon and the radar target in Ramey's office, which is another bit of minutia for all of you. But I asked him specifically, could you have found a radar target and weather balloon if you needed to? And he said, oh, yeah, he could. And these were launched there's all kinds of newspaper articles say these were launched from all over the country, radar targets and weather balloons all the time. So it wasn't all that unusual to find that. And in fact, Brazel had said, and quoted in the newspaper, I found weather balloons on other occasions, and this was nothing like those. Had it been Mogul, it would have been exactly like that, because that's what it was. Mogul was.
Yeah, only bigger.
Well, more of them.
It came down, yeah.
But go ahead.
To try to get to an explanation, if you're kind of pulling away from an extraterrestrial explanation and you don't think the Mogul explanation is good, then what do you think really did happen, assuming it's not extraterrestrial or time travelers or something like that, but something of human construction? What do you think happened?
Well, first of all, let's not rule out time travelers, because that's much more fun than some of these other explanations.
I know, yeah. Or people from the hollow earth, they crawl out from the hollow earth. And
no, that's not nearly as much fun as time travelers.
Well, you're right. Time travel is a lot of fun.
The problem is I don't have an explanation. I don't know what it was. I will tell you it's not Mogul. I can tell you it wasn't a rocket from White Sands. I can tell you it wasn't a aircraft accident. I can tell you a lot of things that it wasn't. I don't really know what it was. I am concerned because we have problems with the extraterrestrial explanation based on the testimonies that have collapsed over the years. But we're going to have to wait to talk a little bit more about this when we come back, because we have to take a short break here. A lot of this has been discussed at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and it is discussed in great detail in Roswell in the 21st Century. We will be back right after this, so please stick around.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
Wouldn't you love to know the secret to everything? Well then, meet Dr. Kimberly McGeorge and her cutting-edge breakthrough knowledge that combines science with possibility. Dr. Kimberly brings real-life answers and healing to those open to alternative solutions. She teaches solution-based programs and classes that will change all areas of your life forever. Specializing in conscious creation, intuitive readings, and energy medicine, you can rapidly shift health, relationships, business, and money and abundance challenges quickly. Receive her best-selling book, Secret to Everything, at no cost by going to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone. That's right, transformation can start now. Just go to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone and receive Dr. Kimberly's book for free.
What Happened in Benghazi is revealed by Nicholas Genix, author of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. He informs the American people that President Obama deceived them by advocating a strong foreign policy prior to the 2012 presidential election, and Hillary Clinton supported this deception. As the title infers, there is a connection between Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. Ample evidence informs Americans that Obama's early indoctrination in the Quran developed an affinity for Islam, why the Quran is the source of discontent in many countries, and why the Obama foreign policy deception led to poor military action and caused the loss of American lives in Benghazi. Genix provides 36 questions for the Select Committee on Benghazi to validate if Americans are justified to mistrust President Obama and Hillary Clinton. An overview of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi is presented on the website www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
And for those of you keeping score at home, we are back. And I don't know how this has happened that we've come back, given the discussion that went on privately here. I wanted to move away from the Roswell case, which I think Robert and I pretty well hammered into the ground. And you can take a look at some of what he says in his book, Bad UFOs, or at his blog, www.debunker.com and www.badufos.com. In his book, he talks about abductions. And the one thing that annoys me about these discussions, well, there's two things. Number one is, unfortunately, I am the guy who first reported the aliens coming into the bedroom. If you go back to 1976, I did a story about a family who thought they had been abducted by UFOs, and they had come into the house to take them out. I think that's the first time it ever appeared in print. So that's my responsibility, and I abdicate that right now. The second thing is...
Well, yeah, I attributed that to our dear friend Bud Hopkins, of course, and, he being his book, what was it? His first book was
Intruders.
one... Intruders, was the one that first had this business, at least on a big scale, had the aliens coming into the bedroom. Before that, if you wanted to be abducted, you had to go out someplace where it's dark and maybe a clear sky and a lot of stars and the moon or something. But then, the aliens would come and get you rather than you going out and having to kind of be ensnared by them. So you're saying that you actually beat him by a couple of years on this?
Oh, absolutely,
that's pretty good.
Absolutely. I did it in a Saga's UFO report. It was called A Family Kidnapped by UFOs. And in the story, the woman didn't want to be identified by her last name, so I used the pseudonym Pat Price, which is actually in Intruders. Bud Hopkins talks about that case and uses the name Pat Price, even though after that, months afterwards, her name came out as Pat Roach. And she was very sincere in her belief. She was just, I think, a victim of sleep paralysis. But she had talked about how the creatures had come in the house, and she remembered one standing off in the corner with some kind of a device. And you look at sleep paralysis, and you learn that in 80 or 90% of the cases of sleep paralysis, the person who suffers from this talks about an alien, some kind of presence in the room with them. So So you look at that. I think the article came out in 1976, and Bud Hopkins actually mentions it, which leads to an anecdote, which is I was doing a talk at the MUFON Symposium about abductions, and Bud Hopkins came up to me and says, "How can you talk about abductions? You're not an abduction researcher." And I said, "You quoted from one of the cases I investigated in your first book." So that was how I could talk about it. And that was my complaint about Bad UFOs, is you did not mention the abduction enigma, which Russ Estes, Bill Cohn, and I had written in 1997, that came out with a lot of this information.
I should have mentioned that, because it is a fine book, and I talked with Bill Cohn a couple times. I think he came to a couple of the PsyCop conferences and other gatherings, and I think we're in pretty much agreement on this. These have, psychological explanations and are not actually reflecting anything that's occurring in the real world that's out of the ordinary. And it used to be very common for this to be interpreted as religious beings, angels or devils or whatever, and incubi, succubi, and so on would come at night and visit people, and they had sexual content to a lot of these things, even back in the days, of devils. Would they, be, demonic beings would come and would copulate with men and women, and the theory was, well, they're trying to gather up the sperm and then they give it to, some other woman, and they get pregnant with the devil's child or the other person's child or something. And it's always had a sexual element to it. I reproduced in that chapter some of the two of the cartoons of Buck Rogers, cartoons from 1930, which shows an abduction, an alien abduction. Wilma, who I guess is like Buck Rogers' girlfriend, is abducted by this big circular craft. He says, a great mechanical claw lifted Wilma up into the mysterious hovering sphere. And then when she's taken on there, she was given what we would now call a table examination, as they have these supposed stages or elements. So Eddie Bullitt has a list of elements of UFO abductions that are supposed to indicate a real abduction as opposed to a fantasized one. And turns out that this Buck Rogers story lists it almost as better than any of the modern stories. So but it's not any deep mystery here. I don't think it has to do with with drama and with the way of telling a story and what has to happen. And of course, she's laying on this table, and she's in a very short dress. It's kind of slid up, and the alien beings, who are some sort of cat creatures, are examining her. But it's very interesting to see how this has a lot to do with sexual imagery and such.
But we look at some of the science fiction films from the 1950s. I think of Killers from Space specifically with Peter Graves, which is really a bad science fiction movie. It's so bad it's fun.
Yeah.
But he talks about how he was abducted out of the airplane that was about to crash, and they bring him to their cave where they're doing this sort of thing, and he's on a table and he sees his heart taken out of his chest as they manipulate it and make sure that he's still alive and that sort of thing. And so you have all the elements of the abduction of the big-eyed aliens. That was the big thing about the movie, is he was really bothered by their big eyes. And but you have all the elements of the abduction in this really bad 1950s science fiction movie when Bud Hopkins, and I pick on Bud Hopkins because he was sort of the guru, saying there were no traditional sci-fi gods or demons to account for the abduction phenomenon. And we say, yeah, Killers from Space, pal. Take a look at that.
Yeah.
And you can go from other things as well. The science fiction from the 1930s that you were talking about as well kind of leads us in that direction. So we've got all that.
Yes, it does. Marty Kottmeyer has written some articles that are just really go into this in great detail of science fiction precursors for the because you're right. Bud Hopkins said that we are unpredisposed to see. Or maybe it was Jake, because I thought it was Hopkins who said that, we are unpredisposed by science fiction to see, abductions of this story. And then he went into that and showed how, no, we are very much predisposed to see these things based on the existing science fiction.
Well, even if we grant that point, that we're not predisposed, the victim of abduction is not predisposed by the science fiction. All we have to do is look at the transcripts of the hypnotic regression sessions in which this information comes out, and you can see the operator, meaning the hypnotist, whether it's someone called in by an abduction researchers to conduct the questioning, or it's somebody else, or it's a researcher himself or herself doing it. We see them leading them into that direction. You'll read the person saying, "I don't remember anything more," and they say, "Yes, you can. There's much more there. You can get to that. We'll get you into a deeper state of hypnosis and bring all this stuff out." So there's a real problem the way the research is conducted and that sort of thing as well. I am not proposing that all abductions are the result of sleep paralysis, by the way. I think there's a lot of other explanations, but they're all terrestrially based. But sleep paralysis is one that I think leads to a lot of the belief that somebody's been abducted. And what I was thinking specifically is they say, well, some of the abductions are not pulled out through hypnosis, but the person's come to them with an episode of sleep paralysis and said, this thing happened to me, and I seem to remember an entity in the room, and they put them under hypnosis and drag them into the alien abduction arena.
Yeah, exactly. Make it fit the story better. I can remember David Jacobs saying in some of his talks that when people are first put under hypnosis to talk about the abduction that they reportedly have had, that their stories vary all over the place and they don't recall it accurately. They don't get it accurately, but it's only after repeated sessions then they are able to recall it accurately. In other words, he's saying that he basically badgers them and leads them until they tell the kind of story that he wants them to tell, and then that's taken as proof that all the other people are telling the truth about these things.
Well,
of course,
John Mack,
some people are talking about military abductions, and it's kind of silly, I think, but some people take that seriously. The idea that the military is abducting people. Yeah.
John Mack had said at one point, and it's actually in Bryant's book about the Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. John Mack had actually said there was a strange matching between the abduction researcher and the type of story they got, and he said that it was like the abductee sought out a abduction researcher. They sought out Mack for the Eastern philosophy researcher, or Hopkins for the cold scientific aliens, and Jacobs for the hybrids. And I flipped the question on them, as did Russ Estes and Bill Cohn, which is, don't you think maybe you're getting the story you want to hear as opposed to the guy searching you out? The problem is not with the abductee, it's with the researcher.
Right. Yeah, even Phil Klass commented on that years ago, but of course, people won't believe it so much if Klass says it, but if John Mack says it, then that's much more revealing, I think.
Well, Robert, I have to say this. We've come to the end of our hour. All too quickly here. We'll probably have you back at some point so I can beat up on you some more. Or
all right, that'll be good fun. We'll get some specific something and talk about it.
There you go. His website is www.debunker.com. The blog is badufos.com. And his latest book is Bad UFOs, and you can get all of that there. For more information on this, take a look at my blog, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And for some of the minutia that we talked about on Roswell, you can find it in my book, Roswell in the 21st Century, which goes into great depth about all of this. We will return next week with Chris Rakowski talking about UFOs on a different perspective. Until then, stay loose, have fun, and we will return in 167 hours.